This afternoon, our speakers will share their reflections on Justice Ginsburg's life as a justice, judge, lawyer, scholar, mother, and wife.
I never met her in person, but Justice Ginsburg's death is a punch right to my gut. I never heard her speak in person, but her voice resonates in my head. I read her words about equality and hear her saying, and I'm going to quote her, "Women belong in all places where decisions are being made. It shouldn't be that women are the exception." I hear her speaking about justice. We should not be held back from pursuing our full talents, from contributing what we could contribute to the society because we fit into a certain mold, because we belong to a group that historically has been the object of discrimination. I hear her talking with immigrants. We are a nation made strong by people like you. And every day, I try to live up to her words on leadership. Fight for the things you care about, but do it in a way that will lead others to join you.
For me personally, Justice Ginsburg was a role model. My mom was a Jewish woman lawyer. I'm a Jewish woman lawyer, and my daughter's a Jewish woman lawyer. And we all did different paths, but in many ways, my mother's path and my path were not dissimilar from the path that Ruth Bader Ginsburg had. When my mom graduated law school, nobody hired her. She became a bookkeeper until her brother gave her a job. When I graduated law school, the Board of Bar Overseers tried to prevent me from becoming a lawyer because I was a woman. I couldn't get a job except in government because Ruth Bader Ginsburg had paved the way so women had equal opportunities in government, but not in the private sector. Fortunately, my parents were both lawyers. My daughter did get a job in the private sector, but we all felt how hard it was to be a woman and a Jewish woman. And as I look at Ruth Bader Ginsburg lying in state in the Capitol, wow, there's a lot of firsts. The first Jewish person, the first woman, something that we could not think of, at least when I was growing up, that somebody would have made such a difference. Somebody would have been the icon that Ruth Bader Ginsburg was.
Justice Ginsburg died on the eve of Rosh Hashanah, the celebration of the Jewish New Year. Rosh Hashanah is the beginning of the period of 10 days when one reflects on one's life this past year and how well it was lived. Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, comes at the end of this time of reflection, and we are written in the book of life by God, and our fate is sealed for the coming year. There's a legend in Jewish tradition that if one dies on the eve of Rosh Hashanah, one is a tzaddik, or in the case of Justice Ginsburg, a tzaddikah, the feminine version. The translation of tzaddikah is someone who's righteous. The legend, as tweeted by Nina Totenberg, has it that if you die in the last minute before the new year, it means that God has held back until the last possible moment because of the person being needed here on earth. And only the most righteous are given that kind of opportunity to be the tzadikah. In the case of Justice Ginsburg, that feels exactly right. Rabbi Holtzblatt spoke at the ceremony for Justice Ginsburg at the Supreme Court. She talked about how Ruth was born into a world that didn't see her, and she dedicated her life to making things different for her and for others in the same circumstances. She talked about how Justice Ginsburg practiced law as a lawyer and as a judge according to Jewish tradition. The Torah asks us never to forget those who live in the shadows and for whom freedom is not guaranteed. Justice Ginsburg works hard for the other, as the Torah commands us to remember those with difficult life situations, those in need without homes, family, or means, and those whose rights are being trampled. The rabbi went on to talk about how Justice Ginsburg related this to her work in the law. The phrase, "we the people," has a different meaning now, than it did before Justice Ginsburg did her work. On a personal note, I've been inspired by Justice Ginsburg, as were prior speakers, to stand up for the principles that held up for those in need, and I'm grateful for her work and for her leadership. I was fortunate to have had a mother with similar leanings. She was born in 1910 and became a doctor in the 30s, long before that was the accepted thing for women to do. I learned early that we are all better off if we give everyone a chance to succeed. Some of this is at the core of the many things I've worked on in the council, especially now as we try to make room in Newton for people of all incomes and all races.
What most impressed me about Justice Ginsburg was her belief in equality, justice, and the dignity of every human being. I believe that philosophy guided her in both her personal life and her legal career. In her quest to break down the legal barriers that prevented women from achieving their full potential, she understood that it was not necessary to demonize men to do so. In two of her earlier cases, she defended men who had been denied certain benefits due to spouses because the laws which granted those benefits had been written to protect women. Yes, it was a brilliant legal strategy, but I think it was also based upon her belief that sex discrimination was wrong, whether directed at a man or a woman. With those cases and others, she persuaded the Supreme Court, made up of only men, that laws which were discriminatory based upon sex were a violation of the 14th Amendment of the Constitution. However, today, as an African-American woman in these turbulent times, her dissenting opinion in the Shelby v. Holder case in 2013 is the one most present in my mind, as it began the evisceration of the 1965 Voting Rights Act. Mark Morial, the CEO of the National Urban League, wrote the following in his statement on her death. Justice Ginsburg was one of the greatest champions of equal opportunity to serve on the Supreme Court in recent history. Her dissent in Shelby v. Holder pointed out that, quote, throwing out pre-clearance when it worked and is continuing to work to stop discriminatory change is like throwing away your umbrella in a rainstorm because you're not getting wet. How prescient were those words, as we have seen since she uttered them. State after state passed laws which have whittled away at the right to vote for African Americans. For me, Ruth Bader Ginsburg was and be remembered as one who stood for equality and justice for all.
I even had the honor to meet Justice Ginsburg when I was a law student. My school hosted a symposium honoring women in law, and both Justices Ginsburg and Sandra Day O'Connor, who were at the time the only two women to have served on the Supreme Court, came to speak to a packed crowd. I still remember sitting in that audience thinking how in awe I was of them. At the time, I wanted to be a constitutional litigator. You know, things change. But what Justice Ginsburg and Justice O'Connor talked about that day sticks with me. While they took very different approaches in their career, their message was essentially the same, that it was important to think deeply and critically, both in law and in life more broadly, and to be confident in the analysis that you did. So Justice Ginsburg transferred from Harvard Law School to Columbia and graduated tied for first in her class. Still, she couldn't get a legal job. She was turned down by New York law firms, large and small, and she could not get a judicial clerkship until one of her professors, who served as a conduit of bright law students to some of the judges in New York, told his friend, who was a judge, that he would never send that judge another law clerk unless he hired Justice Ginsburg. Justice Ginsburg pleased that judge so much that she stayed in her clerkship for 2 years rather than the traditional year. When I went through that same judicial clerkship hiring process many decades later, I faced none of those same hurdles, and a number of the judges with whom I interviewed were women. And it was because of people like Justice Ginsburg and her contemporaries. Now, it would be facile to say that she wrought these changes by herself. She was one of a group of talented and hard-working women who got their feet wedged into doors and proved their competency against doubters and naysayers. She and her contemporaries pushed those doors open, and for themselves and for those who came after them, by being good at what they did. Now, we still have a lot of work to do to attain equality in the workplace for minorities, for women, for LGBTQ people, and for many others. But I can say confidently that I benefited from the work that she and others did. When I was made an equity partner at my former law firm while I was on maternity leave, and when everyone knew that I would be working part-time when I returned, that's not something that would have happened without the years of sacrifice that Justice Ginsburg and others like her made for the benefit of me and many others